dying. They held a cold flannel on her head and held her hand, speaking to her gently. One of them, maybe her daughter, explained to her mother that she was dying, that she would only have a few hours, maybe less, to live. I thought it was quite a harsh but brave thing to do. I wondered if I were in the same situation whether I could break this news. But it was the elderly woman's right to know. She smiled and looked at them with her weary eyes. I felt a tear fall as I watched this family's tragedy. I wondered what the woman's thought patterns as she knew she was dying. Possibly early on she was okay, doing the everyday normal things she would have done. Now she had the last moments of her life thrusted upon her. How could one's mind cope with such a thing? Was she going over her life? Was she in too much pain? But just grit her teeth and bear it, just wishing the final moment to come. Did she get pains in her heart, thinking that was it only to open her eyes again and wait the final bow? I could take it no longer and left the house so that they could grieve in peace, alone. I walked up the street. The guards were getting in the van. I went up to the driver and asked for a lift. He didn't answer me, but gave a small nod. So I got inside and he drove up the road, out of the city and in a northerly direction, as I too had been travelling since I left the dead city. The night came, and I slept as they drove. As I did so, along the bumpy road, I thought about the general, about my feelings towards those in power, and considering that they were the people to blame, not the institution, for what a country would be without a government or its leaders, law, and all these things that made up a free and fair country. The ideals were right. It was the people who spoiled them, trying to become greater, richer, powerful. If governments could be ruled with men with pure hearts, then what a world we would live in, a new world. I wondered whether I wanted the general to die, what kind of a person this made me. How could I be considered good or right with a mind that wanted to kill? Despite what he had done, the millions he had killed with his nuclear weapon. I half thought to myself whether it was because of my words that the folk had returned to kill him, and all those with him. I found more difficult questions than answers. I thought of the boy Jason, now back with his father, the bitter feelings it left within me, how he seemed to forget about me so soon, as if I was never part of his life. There seemed so many thoughts that came back to me. It made me feel terribly sad and alone, but most of all, I felt incredibly tired. When I awoke, we had arrived at an almost serene place. It looked much like a forest clearing. There were big green trees to the left of me. To the right there was a desert-looking area, almost a contrast of how life used to be and how it was now. I walked across the hot desert area, the sun beating down upon me. I imagined the strong winds had swept whatever once stood there away. I was sweating as I'd never sweat before. It was strange coming from a place where snow was falling to a place where a hot sun rose above, more proof of the fact that this chemical weapon could not only infuse human atomic structures, but Mother Nature's as well. It was difficult to know what really was occurring and why. I had no answers. All I had was my sight, my sound, all the senses God had bestowed upon me, as well as wisdom and the knowledge from people I had spoken. But a lot of it was my own personal conjecture. In order for me to understand what was going on, and whether indeed what I thought was right, was an entirely different question. But then I thought, much of man's life is based on this fact, that we don't really know much of situations and facts. We use our own interpretation to gauge some kind of picture in our mind. Maybe each of us, for the same situation, has a different picture. So for me to fall into this old trap only seemed natural. I stopped thinking about this line of questioning when I was at a familiar building in front of me. I say familiar, but I had never seen it before, but its whereabouts was known to me. It was a radio studio, and I imagined inside I would find the disc jockey I had listened to on the radio, The hot weather also concurred with the situation, one listener reported to the DJ before the transmission was lost. I cautiously opened the door and was taken aback by the stench. There, slumped on the controls, was the DJ, still wearing his headset. The metal from it had melted into his hair. His hands and his face also seemed to have melted in the mixer, on which had now become his open grave. The heat at some time must have been so severe he had melted on the mixer, or the two had become one. I closed the door and left. Walking further on, I came to what looked like a waste disposal area. It stretched out for miles. Maybe it was such an area, or maybe this was the remains of a once giant city, all crushed up in little insignificant pieces. I stood upon the rubble, the waste, and looked out upon it. There was plenty of black bags and what looked like rubbish, but also there was rubble and body parts. Maybe it was a mixture. It was only fitting that human remains should find their way into a waste disposal area. I looked across at the expanse that it covered. I felt a sense of sadness as it evoked upon me the end of a once great nation, and yet the stench remained, of the suffering that continued whilst empires rose and fell, the children, men and women who died of curable diseases, the countless arguments, wars, corrupt politicians and leaders. I no longer looked down upon, instead I looked to, the beautiful sunset burning bright, hues of orange and gold, which gave me a kind of comfort that mankind might have a brighter future to come.